I'm Alan Winters. I'm a professor of economics at the University of Sussex. Well, actually, just a retired professor now. And I was founder of the UK Trade Policy Observatory and, until last week, co-director of the Centre for Inclusive Trade Policy. From the white hair, you can see I've been doing trade policy a long time. So international trade, what it says on the tin, it is trade between countries. It involves one country exporting something, another country importing something. Sounds perfectly straightforward, and in one sense it is, but actually it's tied up with all sorts of other complications, and that's what you that's what you see in the press about all the excitement. So, for instance, you might want to have standards for the goods that you import. You might be imposing taxes on imports. You might be subsidizing exports. And in particular, remember that most trade is undertaken by large companies. They have to invest heavily in trade. And that means sudden changes in other countries' trade policy are very upsetting. So trade policy is important for creating stability for firms. And that's the reason, really, that we get conflicts over trade policy. Now, why trade? Trading is as old as humanity. Supposing you have something that I want, I've got two options. I can either beat you up and steal it, or we can trade. I can offer you something in return. And frankly, we've been doing that ever since we've been on the planet. Now, international trade is at a slightly bigger scale than that, but it's basically the same idea. What's the benefit? Well, you get different stuff. You might have things I don't have. You might get stuff cheaper. And so essentially by trading between ourselves, we are able to increase the set of things that we can actually consume. Countries gain most by specializing, trying to produce the things that they're really good at and exporting them in order to be able to buy imports of the things they're not very good at. We import lots of fresh fruit and vegetables in the UK because we're not really set up with our lovely climate to produce the stuff. Now, it's pretty obvious that if you can produce stuff cheaper than I can, it's in my interest to import from you. But international trade has got another sort of interesting dimension, and that's what's been called for the last 200 years comparative advantage. Supposing I can produce everything more cheaply than you can, does that mean I don't need to trade with you at all? Well, no, it doesn't. I will still want to trade with you by selling you the stuff that I can do relatively cheaply in return for the stuff that you can do relatively cheaply. International trade also allows us to benefit from economies of scale. If you have only a few plants around the world producing something, they can have efficient scale, better than producing it all locally. International trade gives you more competition. As imports come in, domestic firms have to stir themselves up and compete a bit harder. Sometimes it means going out of business, but very often it means actually they try harder and they end up doing a lot better. And then also it can affect innovation. If you're sitting on a little island of 30,000 people, there's not much point innovating on things that require a large market. There's no point inventing a car if you can only sell it to 30,000 people. And so opening up international trade, opening up world markets suddenly increases the incentives for different places to innovate in different goods. And so we get technical progress as well. So by and large, international trade is a very important part of our world and our economic prosperity. It creates some losers quite often, and one has to make sure one is taking that into account in policy. But that doesn't mean to say that correct policy is stop trading altogether.
It's a pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to have this conversation. It's really important. So the International Chamber of Commerce, ICC, is the largest World Business Organization. We are the voice for business at intergovernmental level, to the United Nations, to the World Trade Organization, to G20, and every other major international institution. We represent 45 million companies across 170 countries. And then my role as Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce here in the UK is really to make sure that the UK industry is there at the table, shaping the rules, shaping policies, contributing to making trade much easier worldwide, working with our colleagues and partners overseas. Trade is fundamental to the UK economy. It always has been. It's worth in the region of £1 trillion a year, of which half of that, broadly speaking, is imports, and half of that, broadly speaking, is exports. And then on top of that, you've got investment too, the investment we all need to drive jobs and growth, especially across the regions, and innovation too. That's very, very important aspect of the investment side of trade. But we can't survive, we can't grow the economy without trading. It's absolutely core to the DNA of the British economy, and it's very, very important we understand it, support it, make sure that it's fit for purpose for the future. And of course, that's all about being modern, digital, and crucially sustainable, so that we are contributing to tackling the climate crisis, and also making sure that our impact on nature is as minimal and positive as possible.
So I'm Ruth Bergen. I'm the head of policy at Transform Trade. We're an NGO that used to be called Tradecraft, who you might know for things like fair trade tea and biscuits. So I'm here to talk about fairness in the trade system, and if it's okay, I'm going to use some notes, so you'll see me look down occasionally, but hopefully that's not too distracting. So my task is to try and talk about whether or not the trade system is fair. And the answer, rather frustratingly, is it depends what you think about some other things, which I'm going to try and explain. So the trade system has its origins in slavery and colonialism, and that's just a fact. That's where a lot of the trade that we know today comes from. So it's built on some quite unfair structures, but obviously then colonialism ended and we got a kind of new trade system. And one of the things that's worth bearing in mind is when the new trade system was being talked about between all kinds of different countries, people wanted a system that would ensure some kind of fairness, some kind of equality between countries. There was a proposal that the trade system should be guided by things like trying to achieve good employment and good work. But that didn't actually happen. That's not the system that we've got now. So the system that we've got now is based on a different set of principles. Things like open trade. So the idea is that trade is as free as possible. You let the markets work and the markets decide what's fair. So they're going to distribute things fairly between people and countries. And that's the best way to do it because we all interact with markets, we make decisions, and that creates a sort of not biased way of deciding how things are allocated. So you have to, if you think that's fair, you have to believe in things like competition. So is competition between countries the best way of achieving fairness? And what people will argue is that when you compete, you drive improvements, so things get better because companies have to compete. They might have to reduce their prices a bit because their competitor is managing to produce things for lower prices. They might have to improve quality because that's what their other competitors are doing. And then the idea is that some people will make money in that system, but the money that they make gets distributed because they have to buy things from other people. They have to buy services, they have to buy goods, they have to create jobs, and all of that means that the benefits that are going to one set of people will benefit everybody else in the society. So that's the basis. So we had the possibility of one trade system based on things like full employment. What we've got is something that really just thinks about how the market works and distribution. A lot of people don't think that that system is working properly. So, for example, we've had the World Trade Organization for 30 years. That was when you really saw the expansion of the trade system, so that it wasn't just dealing with goods, it also deals with things like services and investment. So suddenly services like health can be privatized, can become part of that market. We've had 30 years of that international system, and we still have enormous global inequality. So 50% of the world own 1.2% of global wealth, and the richest 1% of the world own 46%. So that's 1% of people owning nearly half of the world's wealth. So that bit of the trade system that's supposed to distribute things equally doesn't seem to be working very well. And whilst a lot of people will argue that the trade system has helped get rid of extreme poverty, it's actually quite difficult to demonstrate that it's the trade system that's done that. And so lots of people argue that actually countries didn't necessarily open up fully to the trade system, and what they did was wait until some of their industries were ready to compete and then open. So you can look at the UK did that many years ago. Japan did the same, China has done that. So maintaining quite a lot of control, government control over their industries and their economy, and not opening up to free trade.